Back when I was in film school, one of my professors gave me an article he had published that was about the significance of what he called the 5 cyberfilms of 1995. 5 big-budget, high-concept Hollywood movies that dealt with the emergence of the internet age. Since I have the memory of a goldfish, I can't really remember what his thesis was, but I do remember that the article was about how pop culture deals with new technology and how the cyberpunk genre in particular was being used to explore the possibilities and pitfalls waiting for us on what we used to call the information superhighway. Since 1995 is now 30 years behind us, I thought I should revisit the topic and talk about these 5 cyberfilms. They might look antiquated and even a little ridiculous now, but back then, they were on the cutting edge of sci-fi cinema, and today, they are more relevant than you might expect.
The year is 2021, and mankind is suffering an epidemic. People are falling victim to a terminal disease known as NAS, and the warring megacorporations that now rule the world are too invested in their own secrets to do anything about it. That's where Johnny comes in. A digital courier, Johnny has sacrificed his own memories in order to store industrial secrets in his head. And he's got one last job to do before he can retire and reclaim his past. Stuffed with more data than he can physically handle, and with that data being a potential key to curing NAS, his job is interrupted by Yakuza foot soldiers, and now his own brain has become a ticking time bomb. Can he get the information out of his head in time, or will he lose himself to digital oblivion?
For the uninitiated, cyberpunk refers to a subgenre of science fiction that takes a lot of cues from pulp detective noir stories like classic Dashiell Hammett novels and the punk movement of the late 60s and early 70s. But instead of dealing with murder mysteries or modern sociopolitics, cyberpunk focuses on heady issues of digital consciousness, instant global telecommunication, dystopian futures, and transhumanism, which is the notion that, with cybernetics and brain alterations, we could be fast approaching a time where we are no longer strictly human. Now, with that admittedly superficial definition out of the way, you can't have a conversation about cyberpunk without talking about William Gibson. While cyberpunk did technically exist in a primordial form before Gibson, it's fair to credit the novelist with pioneering the genre and bringing it to mainstream attention, alongside Ridley Scott's seminal Blade Runner, released while Gibson was in the middle of writing his debut novel, Neuromancer. Prior to that, Gibson had written several short stories set in a cyberpunk future, most notably Johnny Mnemonic, published by Omni magazine in May of 1981, in which he developed his idiosyncratic style, interconnected universe, and extensive lingo, all of which would become as common to the genre as Tolkien's archetypes are to fantasy. Neuromancer would go on to be the first novel to ever earn a science fiction Triple Crown, meaning it won a Nebula, a Hugo, and a Philip K. Dick Award. It's hard to overstate just how much of an impact it had on the science fiction literary scene, and it didn't take long for Hollywood to take notice. Almost immediately, the studios were competing for the rights, and a potential film adaptation has been in various stages of development practically since the day the novel was published, though it looks as though a streaming series is going to be the first one to actually make it to the finish line. Enter New York artist Robert Longo, who had always had an interest in film. He directed a short film, a few music videos, and even an episode of Tales from the Crypt, and he wanted to turn Neuromancer into a modestly budgeted black and white art film, something along the lines of Jean-Luc Godard's Alphaville, itself an early French New Wave prototype for cyberpunk. Longo became friends with Gibson in 1989, and rather than Neuromancer, they decided to adapt the story Johnny Mnemonic, which they felt was more manageable. Although the project did get early approval from Warner Brothers, studio shakeups forced Longo and Gibson to shop it around elsewhere. They discovered then that nobody was really interested in making an artsy $2 million science fiction film from a first-time feature director. Then came Total Recall, and the calculations changed. Hollywood scrambled to find more high-concept sci-fi stories they could turn into ostentatious action movies, and TriStar Pictures, in conjunction with a few international distributors, agreed to finance Johnny Mnemonic on the condition that they make it for over $20 million and ditch Longo's more art house aspirations. Ultimately, seeing no other way of getting the movie made, Longo and Gibson agreed, and Johnny Mnemonic was underway by mid-February 1994. The title role of Johnny was originally given to Val Kilmer, who left the project to play Batman. So instead, the role went to Keanu Reeves, known at the time mostly for Point Break and the Bill and Ted movies. Rumor has it the script was literally left on Reeves' doorstep, but this is probably just a Hollywood myth. Reeves and Longo got along well, and Longo felt that Reeves understood the role and understood what the director was trying to do with the movie. Reeves' best scene, the now famous room service tirade, was inserted at the last minute to give Johnny a bit more personality and to give Reeves a chance to be more animated.
I want room service!
The female lead, meanwhile, is played by Dina Meyer in her big screen debut as Jane. In the original story, her character is the ubiquitous Molly Millions, but due to the fact that the character also appears in Neuromancer and that the rights were with another studio at the time, they changed her to somebody else. Although Jane's similarities to the cyberpunk femme fatale icon are obvious to anybody who's read enough of Gibson's early work. Second billing, though, went to Dolph Lundgren, who plays a character entirely invented for the movie and originally intended for U2's Bono.
Jesus, Jane.
Lundgren was cast by the studio for his international appeal and action movie credentials. Robert Longo was at first hesitant about the actor, though he quickly warmed up to him and let him loose to play the unhinged street preacher in the most deliciously over-the-top way imaginable. As much as I like Lundgren and think the character has potential, you can tell he was tacked on, as he seems to serve little narrative purpose. It doesn't help that his best scene, in which he nakedly delivers a twisted religious sermon on transhumanism, was cut for Western audiences. Other actors worth noting are Japanese superstar Takeshi Kitano as the Yakuza boss Takahashi, Ice-T as the leader of the Low-Techs J-Bone.
I'm J-Bone. I run heaven.
Hardcore legend Henry Rollins as Spider, German character actor Udo Kier as Ralphie, and the director's wife, Barbara Sokoa, as Anna. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that nobody gives a particularly good acting performance in this movie. Whether you blame the script, the directing, the excessive stunt casting, or just the hyperactive, oversaturated 90s aesthetics, the acting is one of those things that can only be enjoyed for its kitschiness.
What causes it? The world causes it. This causes it. This causes it. This causes it. Information overload!
Filming began on February 16, 1994, mostly in and around the Toronto area, in order to take advantage of Canadian tax incentives. There was a lot of friction between the studio and director, because the studio kept pushing for more action, more explosions, and less exposition, and control of the film's tone and style quickly spiraled out of Longo's control. Gibson and Longo had originally imagined the story to be more satirical and tongue-in-cheek, with one of the things they were trying to critique being the kind of action movie the studio wanted Johnny Mnemonic to be. The aforementioned room service speech was written by Gibson as a way to express some of his feelings about how things were going.
I've had it with them! had it with you! I've had it with all this!
8 minutes of extra scenes were filmed specifically for the Japanese release, all of which focused more heavily on Takeshi Kitano's character, and a lot of action sequences were forced into the film by the distributors. After principal photography was complete, and after Speed released to theaters and made Reeves an overnight superstar, the final edit was taken out of Longo's hands, his chosen editor was replaced, and by most reports, the version the studio put together is wildly different from the film Longo and Gibson tried to make. Similarly, the music was also replaced wholesale. The original soundtrack was put together by the industrial band Black Rain, but it was rejected and replaced by a second score by Michael Dana. This second score does show up in the Japanese edit of the film, but it was also rejected by Sony for the international release. So, finally, the Terminator's Brad Fiedel composed a third score that was augmented by a few soundtrack-friendly songs by bands like Orbital and Stabbing Westward. As much as I'd like to criticize the studio for doing this, I must admit I really like the final soundtrack and even owned it on CD back in the day. Following an extensive marketing campaign that included an internet scavenger hunt and TriStar's first use of a tie-in website, Johnny Mnemonic released in April 1995 in Japan and over Memorial Day weekend in the US, where it had the unfortunate honor of competing with the best of the Die Hard sequels. It flopped with critics, who decried it as a pathetic attempt to bring cyberpunk to the big screen, pointing mostly to the poor acting and plot-hole-ridden script. Audiences didn't flock to it either, and it ultimately only earned a little over $19 million in its domestic run. Even with the international numbers figured in, the movie didn't turn a profit, nor did its tie-in video game. The movie has maintained cult status in the decades since, and Robert Longo was even able to put together his long-dreamed-of black and white version, which released on home video in 2022, though it isn't a director's cut. Personally, I don't understand the appeal, as watching a black and white version has always been possible if you just change the settings on your television screen, and the artistic effect of that change feels hollow when the movie is still the same bombastic 90s action flick it always has been. Not that I have a problem with that. I was an action, sci-fi loving teenager in 1995, and I was already well versed enough in the works of William Gibson to follow along without getting disoriented. I was disappointed by the lack of Molly Millions, but otherwise, I remember thinking it was a fun movie that served as a decent entry point to the cyberpunk universe I knew and loved. As an adult, I can find plenty to criticize. I've already mentioned the terrible acting and the shoehorned edition of Dolph Lundgren, and I can see how a more satirical edit might have been better, or how a lower-budget art movie might have done more justice to Gibson's work. Nevertheless, the movie we got still holds up for me, garish as it is, and feels kind of appropriate in the context of Hollywood coming to terms with the internet age, given that society's understanding of the internet at the time was about as adolescent as Hollywood's understanding of cyberpunk. The point it's trying to make was also prophetic, because digital overload has become all too real in the 21st century, even if it's less a physical nerve virus and more a skibbity toilet brain rot. Johnny is facing the prospect of too much information leaking into his brain and killing him, just as the people around him are falling victim to far too much reliance on digital technology and its corporate sponsors. If that's not a good, rough metaphor for what the world looks like today, I don't know what else is. Therefore, and because I still feel no guilt in taking pleasure in it, Johnny Mnemonic is, and always has been, a sci-fi classic.
I want the club sandwich. I want the cold Mexican beer. I want a $10,000 a night hooker.
The White Hat hacker Angela Bennett has been shown a secret backdoor to the world's premier security software, Gatekeeper, and for this, she is nearly killed, has her identity stripped away, and is being hunted down by a shadowy group trying to infiltrate every computer in the world. Once reliant on the convenience of a worldwide web at her fingertips, she now finds herself hopelessly ensnared by the net.
In 1994, Columbia Pictures wanted to make a thriller, and so the studio turned to Irwin Winkler, the prolific and multiple award-winning producer behind the Rocky series, Raging Bull, The Right Stuff, and much more. After Winkler had made his directorial debut with Guilty by Suspicion, he hired his first assistant director on that picture, Rob Cohen, to be the head of development for Winkler Film. The pair were interested in producing a dark suspense film with a female lead, something akin to the gritty spy movies of the 1970s, movies like The Parallax View. To write the script, they hired John Brancato and Michael Ferris, and their initial screenplays didn't feature a villain, because the antagonist was designed to be the faceless underbelly of the internet. Over a few rewrites, the script was given a somewhat lighter tone, and the character of Devlin was invented to give audiences a bad guy to focus on. By the end of the year, The Net was greenlit on a budget of $22 million, with Winkler agreeing to direct the movie himself. Based on her work on Demolition Man, Irwin Winkler immediately brought in Sandra Bullock, who won the filmmakers over in their first meeting. She had already made a splash with 1994's hit film Speed, and she was wise enough to not sign on without some unspecified concessions, but by October, she finally agreed. Since the movie hinges on her performance, Bullock is essential to making it work, and indeed she does a great job being a likable character while also being semi-believable as a computer nerd who happens to have Hollywood looks. Jack Devlin, on the other hand, took much longer to cast, with auditions coming very close to the start of filming before Jeremy Northam walked in. Northam was an acclaimed Shakespearean stage actor who had only appeared in a few British films, most of them for television. Winkler loved the idea of having a well-trained actor that American audiences wouldn't recognize, and for his part, Devlin makes for a good homme fatale, though not a particularly believable hacker. Meanwhile, Dennis Miller plays the secondary love interest with the ironic name Dr. Champion. Unlike Northam, Miller, well known for his many years at SNL, was chosen due to his lack of professional acting experience, as his improvisational style made for a good foil against Bullock's more rigid one. He also provides a little much-needed comic relief during the second act, and his sleazy psychiatrist character manages to be charming enough that you feel bad when he dies. And sorry folks, but 30 years is long enough for the statute of limitations to have expired on spoiler alerts. Other actors worth noting are Diane Baker as Mrs. Bennett, Ken Howard as the Undersecretary of Defense Michael Bergstrom, Ray McKinnon as Dale, Louis Gossett Jr.'s cousin Robert Gossett as Ben Phillips, L. Scott Caldwell as the public defender, the real-life reporter Daniel Shore, and cameos from multiple family members of Irwin Winkler, including his wife, Margot Winkler, and 3 sons, Charles, David, and Adam Winkler. Charles, as this cop, is the only one I'm confident on. I've spent way too much time on this to let it go, though, so help a geek out, will ya? The other 2 are credited as computer technician and computer nerd, which narrows it down to about 80% of the characters. And for reference, here's some more recent photos of them. Happy hunting! Filming took place over 4 months at the start of 1995, beginning at San Francisco's Moscone Center during the Macworld Expo on January 5th. It was Winkler, an avid Apple fan, who decided to turn the movie into a none-too-subtle advertisement for the Mac. Other locations include the McKesson Building in San Francisco, Haines Point in Washington, D.C., City Hall in Pasadena, Santa Monica Boulevard and the Santa Monica Pier, the LA Convention Center and LAX Airport, and both Frenchman's Cove and Paradise Cove on the coast of Southern California. Many locations were chosen specifically for their connections to Alfred Hitchcock movies, because the net borrows heavily from Hitchcock films like Strangers on a Train and Notorious. To make the computer scenes as realistic as possible, they consulted the brothers Harold and Alex Mann, who had previously worked on Drop Zone and Species. The pair were tech experts, and as such, were given free rein to design the images flashing across multiple computer screens throughout the movie. They knew what the real software looked like at the time, had a good idea what it would look like a few years into the future, and also recognized the needs of a Hollywood production, all of which they balanced accordingly to create something that looks closer to reality than pretty much any other movie of the time period. The music was composed by Mark Isham, who had previously scored A River Runs Through It, Fire in the Sky, and Nell, and I mention that because the soundtrack is one of my favorite things about the entire movie. It mixes a traditional thriller score with more eclectic styles without being too distracting or over the top. I wish I could play some clips to explain myself, but, you know, YouTube and copyright and all that. The Net released on July 28, 1995 to middling reviews, but it nevertheless did good business, grossing over $110 million at the worldwide box office. It spawned a 22-episode television series in 1998, and a direct-to-video sequel, The Net 2.0, directed by Charles Winkler in 2006. Generally speaking, it's not the most well-remembered of the 5 Cyberfilms, but it also isn't picked on as much as the others. It's mostly only talked about because of Sandra Bullock. And I'll be honest, when I decided to cover these movies, I had no idea what I was going to say about The Net, seeing as how I only vaguely remembered it as a bog-standard techno-thriller that my mom really likes. However, seeing it with fresh eyes 30 years later, I'm genuinely surprised by how good it is, especially if you compare it to other 90s movies that tried to tackle the subjects of hacking and the internet. It has its flaws, to be sure. The dialogue is dull, the villain isn't particularly good, Miller and Bullock don't have much chemistry, and there are plenty of laughable Hollywood computer moments.
God damn it, you're in the mainframe. It's eating through Greg's entire system, Devlin. Do something.
But Winkler is clearly a skilled director doing his best to channel classic Hitchcock and the neo-noirs of the 1970s. The film geek in me loves all the visual metaphors he uses too. For example, the opening shot features Angela boxed in isolation, and the closing shot shows her walking out of that box and embracing the outside world, which is just the filmmaker's way of telling you to touch grass. And let's face it, that theme is more relevant than ever in 2025. The Net, it turns out, was incredibly prophetic in that it predicted terminally online culture, of the ability for anyone to get anything they need, even pizza delivery, from the comfort of their computer screens. And all it costs is, ironically enough, your privacy and your identity. It also brings up serious issues in the cybersecurity sphere that are still being tackled today, with monopolistic software that could be hiding backdoors and code vulnerabilities for any group of determined black hats to exploit. Indeed, the decentralized villains of the story, the Praetorians, are analogous to groups like Anonymous and Equation Group, and the idea of a single piece of vulnerable software being used by multiple sensitive organizations is an all-too-real threat in the wake of things like the infamous SolarWinds Orion hack. I gave the writers grief earlier for their dialogue, so let me now applaud their research. In terms of accurately predicting the future, The Net is by far the standout cyberfilm of 1995. So, looking back on it now, The Net is worth reevaluating, not just as a good thriller, but as a prescient warning sign of things to come.
Seldane, the antihistamine of champions.
In the near future, police officers will be trained in virtual reality. And in order to give them a challenge that will prepare them for anything, they've created an artificial intelligence that incorporates 183 of the most violent killers in history. When this AI, known as SID 6.7, enters the real world by way of a nanotech android, only one man can track him down and end the threat. But there's a catch. This man, Parker Barnes, one of the most dogged police officers to ever wear a badge, is himself locked away as a murderer.
At Carnegie Mellon University in 1992, the computer science professor Joseph Bates created an interactive art exhibit called the Oz Project, which was designed to explore the potential for artificial intelligence. One of the programs that made up the exhibit utilized virtual beings called woggles that inhabited a three-dimensional space and were pre-programmed with 20 individual emotions that could be changed by achieving goals and interacting with other woggles, including one that was controlled by a human operator with a mouse. One witness to the woggles was fledgling screenwriter Eric Berndt, who was fascinated by the idea of inserting a woggle that had a personality disorder, just to see what would happen. This inspired him to write a screenplay about a psychopathic AI, built from the profiles of serial killers let loose in the real world. This script found its way into the hands of Brett Leonard, a director known for music videos, visual effects, and for directing previous review topic, The Lawnmower Man. After The Lawnmower Man, Leonard was inundated with scripts about virtual reality, but Berndt's script was the first one to get his attention. And so, after directing the Dean Koontz near-death experience thriller Hideaway, he signed on to make Virtuosity. The lead role of Parker Barnes was originally written for Mel Gibson. And let me pause here for a second to ponder what it was about Mel in the 80s and 90s that made screenwriters so hell-bent on killing off his family. Mad Max, Lethal Weapon, The Patriot, and Braveheart are just a few examples of this, and apparently, Virtuosity was going to be another one. But I digress, because Gibson wasn't interested. Arnold Schwarzenegger was also considered, but he was too expensive. And then Michael Douglas nearly signed on. However, in the end, the role went to Denzel Washington, a major box office draw and rising star, with movies like Malcolm X, Philadelphia, and The Pelican Brief already under his belt. To play opposite him as the primary villain, Sid, they initially considered Kevin Spacey, who would go on to play the serial killer John Doe in Seven, which released just a month after Virtuosity. Spacey was a hot commodity at the time, though, so they had to look elsewhere.
Caroline, why don't you eat something?
Lloyd, why don't you eat me?
And so the Australian singer-slash-actor Russell Crowe was given a chance to make his American debut as an over-the-top killer android.
I'm vaguely offended by that.
As much as I think Spacey could have made the role more menacing, I must admit Crowe steals the movie for me, because he is clearly having way too much fun in the part, which works for both the character of Sid and the tone of the picture.
Hey, buddy. How's the wife and kid? Still dead, huh?
Crow said he based his performance on a number of people, including Adolf Hitler, Bobby Darin, and his dentist, and it was Crow who convinced Leonard to get the rights to the Bee Gees' Stayin' Alive. The primary love interest, Madison Carter, is played by Kelly Lynch, who had made a name for herself in Roadhouse and Drugstore Cowboy. She auditioned with Washington to ensure they had good chemistry together, but for reasons I'll get to in a moment, that chemistry really didn't make it to the final film. A couple of other actors whose work wound up more on the cutting room floor are the great William Fichtner and Louise Fletcher, the latter of which is notable for also appearing in the early VR movie Brainstorm, which is another film I've already reviewed on this channel. Fichtner and Fletcher are great in their roles as the leaders of the VR training project, but they hardly get enough screen time to justify their paychecks. Other actors worth noting are William Forsythe as Chief Cochran, Steven Spinella as the absurdly evil Dr. Frankenstein stand-in Dr. Lindenmeyer.
Death to the pigs. You have no idea what you're up against.
Kevin O'Connor as the horny android maker who is duped into giving Sid a body, Tracy Lords as this singer, the great Michael Buffer as himself in a fictional version of UFC 10, and last but not least, a very young Kaylee Cuoco as Madison's daughter Karen. Filming took place over 4.5 months in early 1995, with location shooting done around Los Angeles and Long Beach, California. Just prior to the start of shooting, though, Denzel Washington insisted on making several significant changes to the story, the most consequential of which was the removal of a romantic subplot between Washington's Parker and Kelly Lynch's Madison. According to Lynch, this change was made for racial reasons, because Washington didn't believe audiences would accept a black man getting romantically involved with a white woman, which is the same reason he gave for downplaying any romance in The Pelican Brief a couple of years earlier. To be clear, I think Denzel Washington is one of the greatest actors of his generation, and I have the utmost respect for both his craft and his perspective on life. However, I think he was absolutely wrong here. The character arcs for both Parker and Madison are rendered almost null by this one change, and when you take away the character dynamics of two of the main characters, you kinda take away the story's heart and soul. Put simply, I think Washington unintentionally sabotaged the film over race, and that's hard to forgive. Meanwhile, the visual effects were put together by Brett Leonard's own company, L2, and though the vector-reliant style may look dated by today's standards, or at least the standards of 10 years ago, they were nevertheless pretty impressive in their time, and a big leap forward from the far less convincing graphics of Hideaway just a few months earlier. Virtuosity released on August 4th, 1995, to a pretty cold critical reception. It also failed to resonate with audiences, only grossing $24 million domestically against a $30 million budget. Plans for a sequel were quietly shelved, and though he was bitter about the movie's failure for years, it did help Russell Crowe get his foot in the door in Hollywood.
I think I'm gonna like it here.
The movie did slightly better on the rental market, and has a small but dedicated cult following today, leading to the Vinegar Syndrome treatment earlier this year, with the release of a 4K Ultra Blu-ray remaster that is apparently well done. For me, I do enjoy Virtuosity as a product of its time, and I think it has a wealth of really interesting ideas that are, admittedly, buried beneath several layers of 90s cheese and action movie cliches. In some ways, it can even be seen as a precursor to better and more influential films like The Matrix. I think it failed though because it couldn't find the right balance. and as much as I love and respect Denzel Washington, I do believe his last-minute plot changes did irreparable damage to the final product. Nevertheless, the movie is a fun ride that can still be entertaining for the right audience, especially among people who, like me, were teenage boys in the mid-90s who have a high tolerance for cartoonish characters. As for its place in the cyberfilm pantheon of 1995, the movie does have a lot to say about the potential of future technology. Though it is at its core a Frankenstein tale, it does try to envision where cyberculture could go, especially as it pertains to artificial intelligence and the obsessive need for attention at the cost of humanity. While nanotechnology and virtual reality have yet to match the expectations of a movie like Virtuosity, I do think the idea of an AI designed for a specific purpose spiraling out of control in unintended ways is a very real obsession of the modern age. And from a certain point of view, the movie might be the first demonstration of AI music, and it sounds about the same. I find the Death TV segment particularly telling, as it feels more like a modern-day live stream than it does a live television broadcast. Sid is essentially murdering for likes, and you don't have to dig too far into modern true crime to know that people are doing that kind of thing today, albeit not quite as theatrically.
Where's my audience? Where's my audience?
Sid can be seen as an avatar for the kind of sociopathy that has sprung forth from the internet, a being that has emerged out of the soup of the most vile things out there to taunt us and haunt us. Unfortunately, unlike Sid in the real world, that can't be put back in the box.
Shut up!
Four, three, two, one.
Welcome to our show, Hack the Planet.
Hack the planet!
And for those who...
Dade Murphy, formerly known as the legendary hacker Zero Cool, has finally been freed from his court-ordered abstinence from the internet. At a new school in New York City, he quickly ingratiates himself into the young hacker subculture. However, when one fledgling hacker breaks into the wrong computer and threatens to uncover the crimes of a security expert at a big corporation, Dade's new group of friends finds that their fun and games have put their lives and their futures at stake. With the evil hacker known as the Plague blackmailing his mother, can Dade find a way to help them, or will he betray them to save himself and his family?
In January 1986, shortly after his arrest for breaking into a computer he wasn't supposed to, the notorious hacker The Mentor, aka Lloyd Blankenship, wrote a short essay called The Conscience of a Hacker. This essay, written in the irreverent cyberpunk style of William Gibson, became famous upon its publication in the hacker e-zine Frack, offering a stark look at a youth counterculture raised on computer screens and more than a little love of anarchic freedom. The Mentor describes growing up with a disdain for school and the conservative adult world, and he ends by offering a prescient look at what the internet will one day become, pioneered by criminals looking for information from a world that seems intent on denying it to them. November of 1988 saw the release of the Morris Worm, a computer worm created by a graduate student at Cornell University that wound up infecting around 2,000 computers connected to the internet, in a time when there were only about 60,000 such computers, causing widespread economic damage. Its designer, Robert Tappan Morris, was the first person tried under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the CFAA, and he was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. Fast forward to 1994, when the screenwriter Raphael Moreau, inspired to write about hacking subculture in the wake of the CFAA, was introduced to Mark Ebene, better known as Fiber Optic, at a meeting for the New York-based magazine 2600 The Hacker Quarterly. Ebene spent most of that year in prison for hacking, and his story, combined with other stories Moreau gathered from the underground hacking scene, along with the Mentor's Manifesto and the prosecution of Robert Morris, became the basis for a screenplay simply titled Hackers. This screenplay wound up at United Artists under the stewardship of the English director Ian Softly, known at the time for his work on television commercials and music videos, along with his only film credit at the time, Backbeat. Softly was a fan of club culture, starting in Manchester in the late 70s and early 80s with bands like T-Rex and Happy Mondays, and had even spent many nights clubbing with cast and crew during the production of Backbeat. Since Raphael Moreau saw his screenplay as a commentary on culture, more so than a commentary on technology, Ian Softly was perhaps the perfect choice for director, given his familiarity with the underground scene. To play the lead role of Dade Murphy, aka Zero Cool aka Crash Override, they cast a then unknown 22-year-old Johnny Lee Miller, a television actor who would hit it big a year later with Trainspotting.
Pussy galore, right? What a total misnomer. I mean, I wouldn't touch her with yours.
His primary love interest in the film, Kate Acid Burn Libby, is played by a 19-year-old Angelina Jolie. Jolie, well known to insiders due to her father being Jon Voight, had only been in a couple of films, the direct-to-video Cyborg 2 and the indie flick Without Evidence, though she also appeared in a handful of music videos. Miller and Jolie would fall in love during the filming of Hackers, and they got married the following year. Though, as Hollywood marriages tend to go, they got divorced shortly afterward. The up-and-coming Matthew Lillard, who was actually 25 at the time, plays the goofy Emmanuel serial killer Goldstein, a year before he would go mainstream playing a real serial killer in Scream, and a couple of years before playing a similar role in one of my cult favorites, SLC Punk. The rest of the hacking group is made up of Lawrence Mason as Nikon, Renely Santiago as Phantom Freak, and Jesse Bradford, who at 16 was the only actor young enough to actually be in high school, as Joey. Meanwhile, the black hat villain of the piece, Eugene Belford, aka The Plague, is played by the great Fisher Stevens, while his flunky, Hal, is played by none other than Penn Jillette. Lorraine Bracco plays Margot, and future star of The Wire Wendell Pierce plays Secret Service agent Richard Gill. There are also a few fun cameos, including David A. Stewart of Eurythmics and the famous salsa artist Mark Anthony. Filming on Hackers took place in and around both Manhattan and London in late 1994, with locations including Battery Park, One Liberty Plaza, the newly built campus of Stuyvesant High School, and the Brentford Public Baths, where they built a nightclub out of an indoor pool that apparently has enough historical significance that the production team had to be extra careful not to damage it. Surprisingly, most of the computer sequences in the film were made using practical models and rotoscoping rather than CGI, because the director felt that CGI was too flat and uninteresting. The memorable costumes were designed by Roger K. Burton of Quadrophenia fame. Burton studied real-life hacker fashion at the time and was disappointed to discover that it was fairly non-existent, just a lot of people in boring black clothes and jeans. So he decided the outfits in Hackers should be more vivid and lively, combining the gaudy extremes of the 90s with a more timeless mod look and a lot of iconoclastic utilitarian affectations. On top of that, he wanted to give the Hackers an international multicultural aesthetic that could be purchased in New York City on a budget, to demonstrate the lack of international borders online. And now I get to gush over the soundtrack. Softly chose to highlight the burgeoning 90s electronica scene because he wanted his movie to sound like the future, and he had a prophetic sneaking suspicion that the bands being featured were about to become popular in a big way. At the risk of outing myself as a mid to late 90s party raver and EDM head, this soundtrack has some of my all-time favorites, including The Prodigy, Massive Attack, Underworld, Left Field, and Kruder and Dorfmeister, and it heavily features over the opening credits perhaps the greatest trance house track ever written, Halcyon Plus On Plus On by Orbital. Seriously, that song has been my jam for 30 years now, and I had forgotten I first heard it in this movie. As always, when I talk about music, I wish I could play some of these tracks for you, and maybe show you some of my cringy midlife crisis rave moves, but YouTube doesn't even offer revenue sharing for these tracks, not that I'd be willing to sacrifice 55% of my ad revenue anyway. As for my rave moves, well, I'll show them off if this video gets 10,000 likes. Hackers released in September of 1995 to pretty poor reviews that tended to appreciate its style but little else. It also bombed at the box office, only taking in a gross of $7.5 million in its initial domestic run against a $20 million budget. However, out of all 5 of the so-called cyberfilms of 1995, this one is by far the biggest cult hit, remaining hugely popular even to this day, with late-night screenings, university campus tours, and endlessly quoted dialogue becoming a fixture across the globe. According to Vice, it is considered the greatest hacker movie ever made by real-life hackers. Though I suspect that has a lot to do with the fact that it makes hacking look a lot cooler, more powerful, and more chic than it is in real life. Before I get to my opinion on the movie, I did just want to remind you guys to hit the what was that? What happened? Oh man, not this guy again. What the? How did he even do that? I don't have sprinklers in this room.
Eric. What are you doing talking about a 90s movie? You know that's my territory, so I'm gonna have to take over for a few minutes. I hope that's okay. Don't worry, I won't be long. There's some things I gotta say. Computers in the 90s were a sight to behold. They were a bit clunky and not too aesthetically pleasing. Well, I mean, except for these. How can you compete with that? We loved see-through things in the 90s. But for us kids, computers felt more like an adult thing to use. Unless, of course, you were in computer lab in elementary school and you got a chance to play Oregon Trail or Number Munchers. We don't talk about the original Prince of Persia. Hate that game. When Hackers debuted, it felt like a glimpse into the future. A wild neon digital frontier that you could physically enter. Sure, the movie took some creative liberties, turning cyberspace into floating data towers and roller coaster circuits, but honestly, our real internet was a little bit more memorable. AOL chat rooms were buzzing with people asking ASL. GeoCities pages were in a constant state of under construction. Message boards were filled with strangers arguing the timeless question of who's the better superhero, Batman or Superman. Not much has changed, but we did have that beautiful, timeless, painful sound of connecting to the internet. You know, some people get turned on by that. Not me. Just letting you know. Sure, Hackers had the sleek and futuristic Gibson, but we had our own mainframe. It was a folder on my desktop called Cool Stuff. That's where I kept all those poorly photoshopped nude photos I found of Star Trek 7 of 9. Just admitted that out loud. Oh, and also Chip, my virtual dog. Miss that guy. Now, while Dade was hacking into his high school mainframe to change his classes, I was hacking into our Intel P5 Pentium so that every time somebody logged in, they would hear Homer Simpson singing Nacho Man.
Nacho Man. I want to be a Nacho Man.
That'll never get old. Sure, hackers might have exaggerated a little bit of the computer culture for our entertainment, but I feel like it captured the spirit of the time. That sense that computers gave you unlimited freedom. And for a while, they did. The internet was the Wild West. Everyone had their own weird little corner. Pages covered in spinning GIFs. I ain't saying GIFs. Get over it. Looping song clips, and guest books filled with people saying, "Cool site, dude." Thank you. It's really sweet. Fast forward 30 years and the internet isn't what we imagined. What used to be fun and personal now feels sterile. A carefully curated space begging for your attention with every click and swipe. You see, back then you used to have to commit to getting online. You'd log in and you'd wait through that glorious dial-up symphony. Oh, there it is again. I love it. Ooh. And you'd actually have to think about what you wanted to do or look up.
Okay guys, the first thing that you need to know is that the internet is amazing and it's changing every day.
And we all remember when we had to wait for our mom to get off the phone from ordering that Thigh Master on QVC just so that we could use the internet. But thankfully we had something to keep us entertained at the time, like playing a game of solitaire. Try playing solitaire now on your computer. Ads everywhere. Ads for toenail fungus medication that strangely looks like Parmesan cheese. AI ads telling you to wrap aluminum foil around your doorknobs for protection. Protection from what? What is it that you're not telling me? I'm kind of scared. I kind of want to do that now. Ads for whatever this is. Seriously, what is this? $38 drugstore creams that replace a $21,000 facelift. And who could forget the ones that target senior citizens about Social Security benefits? I'm getting those, and I'm not even old yet. I mean, I'm old, but I'm not Social Security old. Ads, ads, ads. I hate ads. And if you finally make it through to play a game of solitaire from the ads in every corner of the screen, it'll now show you an unskippable ad. Don't even try to multitask and do something else while the ad plays through. No, it knows when you're not looking at it. When you've clicked on something else, it forces you to sit through it. And I know what you're saying. Why don't you just disconnect your computer from the internet so you can play a game of solitaire? Number one, I shouldn't have to do that. Number two, I've tried that and I get this message instead. What happened to us? I don't mean to sound like an old man yelling at a cloud right now, even though I am. Ooh, the cloud. I am yelling at the cloud. There we go. It's updated for the 2020s. But rewatching Hackers brought back this weird nostalgic optimism for a future that never came to be. For all the hysteria about the dark corners of the web, the 90s internet felt more genuine. Look, I know I'm supposed to be talking about the movie Hackers. It is one of my favorite movies. But I'll be honest, Eric probably covered everything that I would want to cover anyway. And he'd do a way better job at it. But for me, back in 1995, I only really recognized two actors that were in the movie. Mr. The Plague, who played the very problematic Indian scientist in the movie Short Circuit.
As we're fond of saying in my country, marketplace makes dull home for rodents. Where are you from anyway? Bakersfield originally.
And Freak, who also played a high school student in the 1995 drama starring Michelle Pfeiffer called Dangerous Minds. Full disclosure, I was terrified to go to high school in my small hometown because of this movie. I was an idiot, so, you know, some things never change. Knock knock, sweetheart. I need to use the phone, so get off the internet. Okay? Thanks. All right. Look, my mom's got to make a phone call, so I'm going to leave you with this before I go. Call it an Easter egg, or Easter eggs. There was a blink and you'll miss moment during Dade's dream sequence that had me wear out the rewind button on my VCR back in 1995. I will leave it at that. So until my next collaboration with the Unapologetic Geek, I'm Mike O'Connor. Hack the planet, friends. Hack the planet! Oh, great soundtrack, by the way, too. I don't know if Eric said that. It's a great soundtrack. And sorry, Eric, for turning on the sprinklers in your house. Didn't even know you had those. Weird. Later.
Yeah, great. Do I have my channel back now? Anyway, that was Mike O'Connor from I Miss the 90s, everybody. I don't know how he keeps getting into my channel, but maybe if you go over to his channel and give him some more subbies, he'll leave mine alone. Okay? So anyway, now that that's over with, let's get back to my topic, my opinion on hackers. Man, he ate all my fries. As a movie about cyberspace, Hackers is a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, it does get a lot of the jargon and technical details correct, more than you'd think, and it highlights real-life stories on the subject, from a kid getting convicted of violating the CFAA to a supposed security expert secretly siphoning funds from a corporation like Richard Pryor in Superman 3. On the other hand, the movie fails at its most difficult task, visualizing hacking in a way that is both believable and interesting for the audience. Like Mike said, the movie makes the choice to show cyberspace as this neon-soaked cityscape, or to show something resembling a real-life worm when talking about a computer worm. This is the film's Achilles heel, because it asks far too much from an audience's suspension of disbelief. By 1995, the vast majority of people were familiar enough with computers to know that internal code looks nothing like that. At 16 years old, it made me pretty dismissive of the movie too. However, I've come to appreciate and even love Hackers in spite of all that, because the movie isn't actually about cyberspace, not really. It's a movie about teen culture in the 90s, with all its vibrant plastic colors and goofy eccentricities, and from that perspective, it succeeds. Dade Murphy is a Midwestern kid thrown into the heart of New York City and has to prove himself, with hacking being little more than a common element that brings him together with a new group of friends as well as getting him into trouble so the plot can happen. In fact, from its narrative formula, the story plays out more like a teen sports movie than anything else, one in which the sport happens to be industrial espionage. So, while I wouldn't go so far as to call Hackers a flawless film, I do think it qualifies as a sci-fi classic, if for no other reason than the pure nostalgia of recognizing what it was like to be a teenager in the mid-1990s. And yeah, Mike, I know what eggs you're talking about.
No, really. I'm not an addict. I'm not. Can I get some more coffee? Come on, man, cheer up. Roll's gonna end in 10 minutes.
Have you ever jacked in? Have you ever wire tripped? No? Virgin brain. Well, don't worry, we're gonna start you off right. This isn't like TV only better. This is life. It's a piece of somebody's life. Pure and uncut, straight from the cerebral cortex. You're there. You're doing it, seeing it, hearing it, you're feeling it. It's about the stuff that you can't have, right? Like walking into a liquor store with a .357 Magnum in your hands, feeling the adrenaline pumping through your veins. I can make it happen. I can get you anything you want. You just have to talk to me. 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 I am your priest. I am your shrink. I am your main connection to the switchboard of the soul. I'm the magic man, the Santa Claus of the subconscious. You say it. You even think it. You can have it. Are we beginning to see the possibilities here? We begin today with none other than the Hollywood icon James Cameron. Now, I haven't spoken much about the man on this channel, at least outside my live streams, because the OCD part of my brain wants to start at the beginning, with his start under Roger Corman and going through his breakout with Terminator and so on, but now my procrastination on that score has caught up with me, and I find myself covering a movie where I have to talk about him. I will tell the James Cameron story eventually, but today we begin well into the man's illustrious career. In 1986, Cameron began work on a narrative called Strange Days, a techno-thriller love story set on the eve of the new millennium, intending it for his future wife/ex-wife, Catherine Bigelow. The project was shelved for a few years, but After working together on Point Break, Cameron and Bigelow fleshed out Strange Days into a detailed treatment, which Jay Cox turned into a full-blown screenplay. With a little more tinkering from Cameron, the initial draft was completed in 1992, the same year as the Rodney King riots. Cameron was able to secure funding for two projects, True Lies and Strange Days, in a $100 million deal between his Lightstorm Entertainment and 20th Century Fox. Lightstorm's research division then went to work devising brand new camera systems for the 9 ambitious Warner-style first-person sequences, which I'll talk about in more detail a little later in this video. Over a year later, Strange Days was set to begin filming in June of 1994, the same month as the highly publicized murders of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. For the lead role of Lenny, there were a lot of names thrown around, but it primarily came down to Andy Garcia and Ralph Fiennes. Even though Cameron wasn't convinced that Fiennes would be a good choice, Bigelow went for him just days after he earned an Academy Award for his supporting role in Schindler's List. While that role as the evil Amon Goth is easily his most terrifying, and while Voldemort is no doubt his most well-known role, Lenny Nero is my favorite Ralph Fiennes performance. He's a slick, slimy, pathetic salesman who still manages to be lovable, relatable, and even a little sexy. And though I mean no offense to Andy Garcia, an actor I do appreciate, I don't think his version would have been as good. However, for me, Ralph Fiennes is not the standout performer in Strange Days. Instead, it's Angela Bassett as his real love interest, Lornette Mason, the ass-kicking limo driver who is the true heart and soul of the story. I'd seen Bassett in other movies before this, like Boys in the Hood and Malcolm X, but Strange Days is the movie that made me fall head over heels in love with her. And long story short, I'm still in love with her today. Sorry, wife. Meanwhile, Juliette Lewis was cast as the femme fatale Faith, in large part because she could sing the songs in the movie, including Rid of Me, which were originally written by P.J. Harvey. The part of Faith's manager, the red herring playback-addled Gant, almost went to U2's Bono, though he dropped out for undisclosed reasons and was replaced by perennial 90s villain Michael Wincott, well known at the time for playing Top Dollar in Alex Proyas's The Crow, as well as Guy of Gisborne in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Why a spoon, cousin? Why not an axe?
Because it's dull, you twit. It'll hurt more.
Lenny's ex-cop best friend, Max, is played by Tom Sizemore, while Vincent D'Onofrio and William Fichtner play the two corrupt racist cops Steckler and Engelman. Joseph Summer plays Police Commissioner Strickland, Richard Edson plays Tick, and the Canadian power dancer Louise Lecavalier plays the formidable Vita.
Enjoy the party.
Filming on Strange Days took place entirely in Los Angeles over the summer of 1994, with locations including Sunset Boulevard and the Los Angeles subway system. The street party at the climax of the movie was filmed at the corner of 5th and Flower, during a rave held specifically for the film, with bands such as Aphex Twin and Lady Miss Keir playing to a crowd of around 10,000 partiers, all of whom had to pay a $10 cover charge. Though the filmmakers got all the footage they needed, the rave had to be shut down early due to several ecstasy overdoses. And before you ask, yes, I do like the soundtrack, but it's not as good in my opinion as the Hackers soundtrack. But I grant that's more a matter of personal taste than anything else. As for the POV sequences, a filmmaking marvel for 1995, they had to straight up invent new technology to pull it off, utilizing an 8-pound 35mm camera with specialty lenses, video assist, and remotely controlled focus pulling, along with a brand new pogo-style Steadicam setup that would allow the camera to swing around like the human eye without being so jarring that audiences would have to reach for the Dramamine. On top of that, the lighting technicians had to use complicated rigging setups, some of which were used at night, that had to be invisible to the camera, which was constantly swinging around in full 360 degrees. Even the digital tearing that marks the beginning and end of each sequence had to be innovated. Though these parts of the film are easily the most impressive feat the movie pulls off, it's ironic that you could probably pull it off yourself these days with just a high-def phone camera strapped to your head and some moderate skill with After Effects. After extensive post-production, with Cameron himself doing a lot of uncredited editing work, Strange Days released in October of 1995 to a mixed critical reception. Many critics applauded the filmmaking and acting, while others lambasted it as exploitative trash. Combined with a lackluster marketing campaign, despite what I think is the best teaser trailer ever produced, and a generally poor season at the box office, and Strange Days absolutely bombed, only earning a domestic gross of $8 million against its $42 million budget. As a result, it nearly ended Kathryn Bigelow's career, though she would eventually recover and earn both Best Picture and Best Director Oscars for 2008's The Hurt Locker. As for Strange Days, it has gotten an improved critical reputation over the decades and has maintained a small but dedicated cult following, of which I consider myself a member. Structurally, it's a hard-boiled murder mystery styled after classic film noir, only with heavy cyberpunk overtones. And when I say cyberpunk, I mean both the cyber half of the equation and the punk half, because not all cyberfilms get that right. The narrative deals with black market technology in a dystopian setting and hits you over the head with its sociopolitics, something that can be said of any William Gibson novel. Granted, it doesn't deal with cyberspace as much as the other cyberpunk films I've covered, but it still feels true to all of the trappings of the subgenre. The squid headset that serves as the central gimmick is very similar, in fact, to Gibson's fictional SimStims technology. In Strange Days, there's a lot to chew on thematically, but once you strip it down to the basics, this is a film about desperation. On a personal level, Lenny is so desperate to recover a lost love that he is blind to the love right in front of him. But on a societal level, this is a future where people have been driven to desperation by injustices both real and imagined and have found a new way to escape into the wire trip. However, as Lenny discovers, the wire trip is not free from that same desperation, and it has forced him to come face to face with the ugliness not only of his chosen profession, but also the ugliness infecting his world. There's also plenty of other thematic angles you could approach the movie from, like voyeurism, addiction, or even a commentary on film itself, and you could argue it served as a warning to the kind of feedback loop society would find itself trapped in by internet culture a decade or so later, after the widespread adoption of social media. It's a movie that understood the cultural moment on a psychological and sociological level, even if it had to accelerate the speed of things in order to set the story at the turn of the century. It's also a very tightly written script with intelligent dialogue that ricochets between hard-boiled romantic language and snappy cyberpunk jargon, only settling down when it has something truly important to say.
Look! This is your life! Right here! Right now! Memories were meant to fade, Lenny. They're designed that way for a reason.
There's also some good screenwriting tricks that you could highlight in a film school class, like the scene where Lenny gifts a double amputee a clip where he's running on a beach. In Screenwriting 101, that serves as his save the cat moment, an early scene where we see the gentler human side of a character that might otherwise be seen as slimy and unlikable. There's also a crazy attention to detail and a few fun Easter eggs for those eagle-eyed enough to spot them. For example, in this scene, the drink the lawyer has on the table is not a martini, it's a Gibson, as in William Gibson. Anyway, I could gush about Strange Days for hours because it's not just my favorite of the 5 cyberfilms of 1995, but it's also, objectively speaking, the most well-made. Therefore, 30 years later, it can be seen as nothing less than a sci-fi classic. Now, as a final note, what have we learned about these cyberfilms? I will say that going back and watching them all again, I was surprised by how predictive they were for what the internet age has to offer, both good and bad. All 5 films are different. Some are more goofy, some more serious, some style themselves as thrillers, while others are almost comedic in tone. But they are all grappling with a new era of technological advancement, one where digital identity is a greater currency than gold. Maybe it's confirmation bias, but to me, it reinforces my previously held belief that science fiction is a window into the future, whether by prediction or invention. And as a genre of storytelling, it gives us things to think about and prepare for, with hidden prophecies we don't appreciate until they have come true. I love all 5 of these films, even more than I did before, and I encourage all of you to be willing to go back and look at them through the lens of the modern world. Then you can tell me what you see reflected back at you.
You're just an 18-year-old girl taking a shower. Are you beginning to see the possibilities here?